Imperfect Thriving, Episode 42, Do a Day with Bryan Falchuk. I hope you've been enjoying the podcast as much as I enjoy bringing it to you every week. If you feel stuck, like you lack direction, or feel like you're just not living the life that you want to live, you've been holding yourself back, just reach out to me and sign up for Blueprint to Thrive coaching. It is 9 modules filled with short videos and activities in which I take you step by step through how to let go of your limiting beliefs, determine what's important to you in life, and the imperfect daily actions to get you there. And it comes with 2 free coaching sessions with me, 30 minutes each one, in which I answer your questions and help you dig deeper into any areas where you feel like you need a little extra help. So you can click in the show notes or just go to imperfectthriving.com and click on Work with Catherine and scroll down to Blueprint to Thrive Coaching. I cannot wait for us to get started. I'm Catherine Ely, former attorney turned licensed counselor and coach. Oh yeah, and recovering perfectionist. It wasn't long ago that my self-criticism and fear kept me from having the self-worth, confidence, and courage to make my life my own. Through life lessons learned and by going back to school in my 40s, I am finally enjoying my life in a way I never thought possible, and it is amazing. I want you right here with me. No need for you to go back to school either. I created this podcast to show you the way to the imperfect thriving kind of life, based on what you value, filled with self-worth, confidence, way more joy, and no more regrets. So let's go.
What I wasn't clear on yet was me. Yeah. So in that moment, my purpose, my biggest motivation was my son's happiness and my own failures really in how I was living my life to support his happiness. Like if he's going to have any chance at happiness, what I felt in that moment is it's not the way that I'm being.
In the intro to this podcast, I say imperfect thriving is a way of life. And it is for me. It's a philosophy and a mantra I come back to, that I cling to. There's a reason I call myself a recovering perfectionist. Because if I do not work at it, if I do not recognize the thoughts that drive me toward my perfectionism, I can so easily slip back into it. When saddled with perfectionism, my main goal is to avoid failure, avoid mistakes. I lose focus on what I want because I'm so hung up on what I don't want. The words imperfect thriving are a daily reminder that I like myself more, I'm more confident, and I accomplish more when I do not expect perfection out of myself. When I focus on what I do want and give myself the grace and love to go after it, knowing it will be through completely, wholly, imperfect action, that's when I thrive. And that is what I want for you, my friend. Maybe you don't struggle with perfectionism, and that is awesome. But today's show is for you because today we have Bryan Falchuk with his amazing story. Bryan has his own philosophy and way of approaching life. It is called Do a Day, and he's going to share it with us today. In this episode, you will learn the moment that transformed Bryan and his entire way of living, Bryan's story of personal struggles, exactly what Do a Day is, and how Do a Day philosophy has transformed Bryan's life, and so much more. Bryan not only has an amazing story, but he also shares actionable, life-changing steps that you can begin today to get closer to your best life. But before we dive in here, here's a little bit more about Bryan. Bryan Falchuk is a best-selling author, professional speaker, and life coach. He's been a C-level executive and part of several startups. He's also committed to helping people overcome and achieve in their lives after overcoming his own challenges. Bryan's best-selling first book, Do a Day, teaches his approach to overcoming what stands in your way in life. He has spoken at 3 TEDx events and has written articles for many major publications like Inc. magazine, the Chicago Tribune, and LA Times. A frequent guest on many podcasts, he hosts his own weekly show called Do a Day. So I won't keep you waiting any longer. Welcome to the show, Bryan. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
So I absolutely loved your book, Do a Day. It is amazing, absolutely amazing. And so, of course, after reading it, I know a little bit about you. But for those listeners who might not have read it or don't know about you, tell us about yourself.
Sure. So I am a husband and father, and right now struggling business person trying to figure out how do you start a business and help it to thrive in a situation where we're all going through. But I'm also an author who writes about kind of my experiences and beliefs and what I've learned as a result of my own struggles and mistakes and all that kind of good stuff. And Do a Day is my first book. And it's also the philosophy through which I have changed and continue to live my life. And from a backstory standpoint, like I was obese and overridden by anxiety and not really doing what I needed to do about that. And so Do a Day is this kind of crucible moment where everything changed that has defined the way that I've gone about things since then. That was 9 years ago this past summer.
Yeah, so I'm so in touch with that. I had completely different circumstances, but a similar experience in my life about when I went back to school at 46 to get my master's in clinical mental health to become a licensed counselor. I had been a lawyer. It was then I kind of realized how anxiety and then actually perfectionism had completely been ruling my life, and I didn't even realize it.
Yeah. Or we justify it, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, this is why I've had these things, or this is how I get through it, or it's warning me about the stuff that's coming.
Yeah, or I'm just a type A personality.
Yeah.
That's all it is. So tell me about that experience that was so life-changing to you that led you to this philosophy.
Sure. To set the stage for it, the reason why I had the anxiety is my parents got divorced really early on in my life. I was the marriage saver baby. And spoiler alert, that didn't work out.
No pressure.
So neither of them will admit to that, but you do the math, it's pretty obvious. So I'll blame my next up from me sister. She was always the one who was at fault. It was never me, right? So it was just, all the fighting because of her led to my parents' divorce. I think that's what it was. As a little kid, you just need to know that things are okay and that you're taken care of, and things weren't. And there was a lot of instability. And at 4 or 5 years old, you don't understand any of those feelings. So you seek that comfort and that stability wherever you can get it. And I wasn't getting that through my family. Their hands were full, and obviously going through a divorce, as much as you want to be there for your kids, like you've got your own stuff that you're dealing with. And so it's not to fault my parents, but I turned to food, and I turned to food really hard. And it works really well in like a maybe 30-second to 90-second window as you're eating those Oreos or whatever. But beyond that, you just feel empty again. And so you go back for more. And that was my story. And so I ended up 100 pounds overweight pretty early on. Like I weigh right now what I did, I say my 5th grade weight. It's possible this is like late 4th grade, and I'm 42. Someone's like, well, I don't know if that's saying the wrong things about 4th and 5th grade. Or I'm like, it's about the childhood time. Like that was not right. My son is roughly that age, and I weighed about 100 pounds more than he weighs for the same size and same height and all that.
And if y'all could see him right now, you wouldn't even believe it. I mean, how fit you are. It's hard to even believe that. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, it's been a transformation. But so I actually lost weight at the end of high school, but I did it really from that same place of anxiety. I eventually got the tools to lose weight and the exercise and understanding. And then, of course, as a teenage boy, you want girls to like you. So there's your short-term motivation, which was a good lesson in short-term motivation. Because once I lost weight, I left high school where everyone knew me as the fat kid, even though I was thin and fit. I was pretty strong back then. I go to college. Nobody knew me as Fat Bryan, except me. I certainly still saw myself that way. But suddenly, all of that social pressure of being the fat kid was gone. And what was replaced is the fear that I was going to become that again. So once again, it's an anxiety story. And it effectively, I was bulimic. I wasn't doing it through purging. Vomiting purging. I was purging through exercise, excessive. I mean, like the summer before college, I would be at the local gym for probably about 5.5 hours a day. And at least 3.5 of that was cardio. I was a skier as well. So I had all my thermals. I wore my thermals and then like a t-shirt and shorts over it. And I would just like sit on a recumbent bike for an hour and a half. And the staff would be looking at me funny. And I'm like making this puddle under me. So those were my days. So clearly not the right mentality. So I wasn't fixing the reason why I was obese. And even though I lost the weight. And so what happens then? Most people who lose weight, you end up gaining it back if you're not losing it for the right reasons and the right ways. So sure enough, first slowly, and then it started to come on in my 20s. Life changes. You got a job, you got more pressure that starts to build. And so I put on, if I had gotten down to 185 to 190 at my lowest, by the time I was now talking 2011, I'm married, I got a 2-year-old, and my wife becomes gravely ill. And at that point, I was 222. So I put back on 40-ish pounds of the 100 that I had lost. It was the summer of 2011. That was my moment where my wife suddenly became very sick. She had had these bouts throughout, like since childhood. And they'd be like 24, 48 hours, very extreme, lots of different symptoms. And the first one came on our honeymoon for me. She had them years before, but they kind of let up. So she thought she was past it. And then we're in the middle of paradise, but no access to anything. And she just gets incredibly sick. And yeah, we got through that. And the next day she was okay. But we'd have these over and over. And then so one hits in 2011. And I'm thinking like, she needs 24, 48 hours. We'll get through this. Like I took the day off from work. I'm there for her. 2 days, 3 days, each day she's worse. I keep going to sleep being like, please, we wake up and she's over it. And it just wasn't happening. And I say she kept getting worse, which was, I think if you told me each day she'll be worse tomorrow, I wouldn't be able to comprehend what that meant because it seemed so extreme each day. It's like, how do you define worse? Like there's nowhere else for her to go. Each day you feel like now we've hit rock bottom. The only place it goes to get better or at least stay the same. So she starts wasting away. She got down to right about 100 pounds.
Oh, wow.
And June 30th, like 4 something in the afternoon, her doctor calls, her primary care, to tell me, I'm going on vacation for 6 weeks. I don't really think there's anything else to do for her. He was sort of saying like she's doing this to herself. She's worked up. I'm like, well, how would you feel if we're now a month into this and you're basically bedridden? So he's like, there's nothing else to do. I'll check in 6 weeks. Now, at that point, she was losing 2 pounds a day. So she's 100 that day. She's going to be 98 by the end of tomorrow. And there comes a certain point where you can't lose any more weight. So I just said to him, I said, doctor, do the math. She's not going to be here when you get back. And that was the first time I had verbalized the fear that I was sitting with, that like each day is getting worse. And at some point, there isn't a worse anymore. There's just nothing. And he just really flippantly is like, oh, just take her to the ER if you need to. And he hung up. So that was my moment because I walked back into our bedroom and
I can't imagine your level of frustration and really even possibly anger with that man of not having any sort of empathy for what
he just didn't get it.
We're going through.
Yeah. I mean, she has chronic Lyme disease, which is for some reason is very controversial and not accepted in the medical establishment. And for me, it's like, I loved history class growing up, and I'm reminded of medieval times where everything was bloodletting. It's like whatever you had, there's a joke on Saturday Night Live where like there's a huge carriage accident or whatever they rode back then and everyone's bleeding out. And the guy's playing the barber, who's also the doctor, because that's what they were then. He's like, get the leeches. It's like they're bleeding to death. It's like, well, we got to take some blood to save them, right? That was science back then. And we observe and we learn and we grow. And that's not what I was finding. But this is typically the way it is. When the new thinking comes about or people are observing something different, you're a heretic, you're against science, you're wrong. And then it becomes accepted. 4 out of 5 doctors smoke Marlboros or Camels or whatever it was back then. Like, oh, it's a stress relief. It's a good thing. Like, no, it'll kill you. So that's what it really felt like. So for the medical community, they have their set answers. She didn't fall into what those were. She tested positive for Lyme and didn't test positive for any of what they were talking about. And we had a doctor who insisted she had full-blown AIDS.
Oh my gosh.
Which is like,
so
yeah.
Frustrating. I had a similar experience with my daughter when she was 12. She was a swimmer and she started losing her hair. She was losing weight. She looked so pale. The pediatricians, I kept taking her back and they were like, I can't find anything. They said, she's got anxiety.
Yeah.
I said, well, she probably does now.
Yeah.
But there's an underlying physical component and something is going on in her body. And I had to research and find out and discover that, wait, she's a swimmer. They don't need to just test her hematocrit. They need to test her iron stores.
Mm-hmm.
And her iron stores were completely depleted, which does cause all of those things and anxiety and lots of other things. And so I felt very abandoned.
Yeah.
We can't find an answer. So we're going to quit looking and say, she just has anxiety.
Right. And so take this medication that's just kind of going to shut you down.
Yeah. You need to take her to a psychiatrist.
Yeah. Which, like, there's nothing wrong with that. We could all use that support, and there's something real going on. Look at a lot of the diagnoses today. I mean, this is a totally different tangent. My editor actually made me take this out of Do a Day because I went down this path. So many of the things that people have are really just a list of symptoms, but there's no root cause of those symptoms that's understood. It's like we're naming these, you have 9 out of these 14 things. I think that's the number for fibromyalgia. But there isn't like, oh, there's the gene or there's the virus or there's this. It's like, oh, you exhibit these symptoms. So we're going to call that irritable bowel syndrome. Well, why do they have irritable bowel syndrome? What's going on with their microbiome? What's going on with SIBO? Like any number of different things that we actually can figure out and can do something about, except that it challenges the norm of what you as the establishment have stood for. And that's a threat. But doctors are scientists, which means observe and learn and grow. So I wish we could get back to that. But in that moment, all I was thinking is fear and frustration. I wasn't actually angry with him because we were so over. Like, I didn't have expectations of him anymore. And we were at the point where it was up to us. But what was overwhelming for me was this was the first, like, not just voice inside of me, verbalization of the reality. Like, I had been thinking, like, I could very well be a widower with a 2-year-old very shortly. It's one thing if we were like 90. We're in our early 30s, just started our family. Not that it's ever okay or you're happy about it or it's like, yeah, whatever. You know, we're old, it's okay. But like we were just starting our life together, not ending it. Mm-hmm. So that's what was hitting me is the reality of that. And I got off the phone and walked into our bedroom and my son was there looking at his mom stuck in bed. And when he turned and looked at me, like that was it. You see your child's eyes in that kind of context. And that was my wake up moment.
What did you get from his eyes? What was he saying to you? What did you hear when he gave you that look?
One of the things that struck me really hard is going back to what I felt in my parents' divorce about things not being okay. He was even younger than I was. And look, not downplaying divorce or comparing our experiences, but like he's watching his mother die in front of his eyes. That's a whole other level of things are not okay, then your parents are living in 2 different places and you're shuttling back and forth and whatever. It's a completely different context. And for me then to take that and think about what that means for the rest of his life. And where I went to with that was his happiness is the single most important thing to me. And very well, maybe completely on my shoulders. And I'm, go ahead.
No, I'm hearing in that moment that what you valued the most was completely crystallized in front of you.
Yeah.
That was it. And then how did that drive you?
So recognizing that if his happiness means more to me than anything, and I will say, you listen to Do a Day on audiobook, which is the original release of it. I didn't re-record it, but I did re-release the book at the 1 year and I made some changes to it because I had done additional growth. What I wasn't clear on yet was me. So in that moment, my purpose, my biggest motivation was my son's happiness and my own failures really in how I was living my life to support his happiness. Like if he's going to have any chance at happiness, what I felt in that moment is it's not the way that I'm being and things need to change. What I've come to understand differently is, and I talk about in the book, like your ultimate motivation, your ultimate purpose has to be within you. And to be fair, or to be dead honest, I was cheating. So I'm like, as a parent, you feel them inside of you, but he isn't really in me. And that's the change I made in the book is he was a mirror into my own feelings about myself and my lack of self-esteem and I mean, I was still the fat kid in my mind. I was still the failure of my parents' marriage, so many things that I wished I wasn't, and I couldn't deal with that. And that's why I was the way I was in all these other areas. And that took much more work for me to get to.
Yes.
But in the moment, my love for my son and the importance of his happiness for the rest of his life, which is, it sounds selfish in some respects, but we have to get over that. That's a mirror for your feelings about yourself and what your childhood was and wasn't, and what you've had to endure that you would never wish upon your children, like the closest thing that you're ever going to have in this life to yourself.
Yeah. And as parents, I'm glad that you like explained the further work that you did that I missed out on the Audible book, because as parents, we can't be the parent that we want to be to our children if we haven't worked our own stuff out, because we're not going to be present for them in the same way.
Yeah.
We're still going to be in our heads, figuring ourselves out, working on things, and we can't be fully present. But when you get to the bottom of everything and you've worked on those issues, resolved those issues, then that is when the magic happens, right?
Yeah.
You can be fully focused on living that value.
Yeah. And things that were, I mean, they weren't even impossible because you wouldn't even have dreamt of thinking about doing them to then blow them off as impossible, are now completed. Like there are things that you will achieve that you would laugh at yourself and join the chorus making fun of you for even thinking about it.
Yes.
Right?
And I definitely want to go in that direction at some point, but I want to dig in a little bit more to your childhood. And we know a little bit from when you were 4 and 5 and how that felt, but could you paint a picture of how your interaction with your family and others around you sort of helped you create that fat Bryan picture of yourself and what
Yeah.
your own thoughts about yourself were?
Yeah.
I think that gets to the core of it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I felt like I was capable and accomplished in a lot of ways and a complete and utter failure in others, and image of myself. And that repeated battle every morning with, what are you doing, man? Like, you got to stop eating like this. You got to do different. Like, you're miserable too. Everyone's making fun of you. You got to stop this. I'd have these like kind of tough love pep talks literally every morning. I can remember it. And by like 9, 10 o'clock, out the window. Probably by like 7 o'clock, when bigger breakfast than I should have had, it's gone. You know, I did pretty well in school. I was a bit of a class clown, so I could have done better, but I think the teachers were annoyed with me. Or I was like rushing through things because I didn't have this drive to do things. So I'd be like, I don't want to do the rest of this test. It's so long. And so I'd like go as fast as I can just to be done with it. I've always been about just finishing things I don't like. Then you go to the physical side. And no matter how much I apply myself, how hard I try, how much I know I want different, I want better, I just can't do it. I keep getting drawn back into the wrong things. Of course I did, because I still have all this pain. I have this sense of things that aren't okay. And like, you eat that cake, you eat that. I mean, it doesn't have to be unhealthy. You just eat a lot of whatever it is and you feel satiated, even just for a moment. And like, I was really weak for that because I wanted to feel better. And remember, I just would rush through the tough stuff. So like, there's a lot of kids aren't. I wasn't willing to slow down and put the work in and make that shift in my own sense of who I am. It's like I see little kids who are chubby or whatever, and their attitude's awesome. I mean, not all, but like you find ones who are like, they love themselves. And I wish for their sake, for their health, that physically they were in a different place. But the fact that they love themselves means they could probably get themselves to a different place when they have the other tools in that toolbox in place.
Yes.
But like to start from that place rather than the kids who look exactly the same, but they're ashamed of themselves, whether they show it outside or not. And it's so weird. Like, I live outside of Boston. I was running along the Charles River, which if you're a runner and you come to Boston, you get it. It's beautiful. I ran past a kid who looked exactly like me. I mean, spinning image of me at like 13, 14. His haircut and clothes were a little more modernized than like late 80s, early 90s. But it was me through and through. Like our eyes locked for a second. I don't know, he probably didn't feel or see anything, but I just felt this, like, this kid is sad inside. And like, I could be dead wrong, but there's something about, maybe I was projecting because he looked like me or whatever, but like, there's something in his sense of self that is going to keep holding him back until he's willing to see himself differently. And as I'm thinking those things, here I am running, like I've got an 11-mile run that I'm on. It's like I can walk down the block for a while. Well, I wouldn't want to, even if I could.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt this sense of possibility and power in remembering where I came from and what I, like very powerful word, I did for myself.
So, how did you take what you felt and that sort of feeling that you had from the way your son looked at you and
Yeah.
how your wife's health was going? How did you take that and create Do a Day?
This was later in the day when that phone call happened, that feeling. And I knew I felt very different. But like we've all had moments of inspiration or like feeling energized or whatever. And I had a lot on my plate. So I couldn't really like just go think about it for a little while. A 2-year-old to take care of and at that point, seemingly dying wife. My wife is still alive, but it certainly didn't look that way. So I have my hands, and I was still working full time. I was able to work from home for a month while we figured things out. So I go to bed. I've always been an early riser. I woke up at 5 the next morning and I still felt it. I was literally like buzzing. I can't explain it. Like I felt it in my bones. And that morning pep talk was different this time. It wasn't like, okay, you got to do different. It's like, why do I feel this? This doesn't feel quite the same. And I recognize that if I don't pause and spend time with this feeling to understand why it's different, it's going to fade away because I'm not going to give it the right kind of soil and fertilizer to grow in. And I work fast. So in that first 30 minutes that morning, it's pitch black, it's quiet. I just thought through like, what is it? And I went to that moment and it was so extreme that I think I could get enough clarity to start making progress on it. But it hit me like a tidal wave when my son looked at me. So I knew the moment where it came from, the emotions involved, the sense of losing my wife, the sense of my son's life and his happiness, and the realization that he's basically watching both of his parents die, one of them just at a slower rate. This was all really profound and really clear. And so I just spent more time with those feelings to understand what is it that matters most to me in all of what's going on. And it's my focus around him. And what can I do to support his happiness going forward, which means doing better right now, but also creating the structure and the role modelship, if that's a word, so that even if his mom's gone, he can look to someone and be like, that's the model I want to follow. That's
Mm-hmm.
how I want to be. I can create happiness and success for myself, even if I lose my mom.
Wow.
It's a
Yeah.
lot to come
So
back
you were
to.
creating a model, a philosophy, a way of living to be the example that you wanted to be for your son.
Yeah. And the evolution of that was also like, and by the way, I deserve that too. Like, it's not just for him. It's also because why should I was miserable. You
Yeah.
know, I was overweight again. I had back surgery a couple of years earlier and I never did the PTs. My doctor didn't push forward. He's like, yeah, no one does it. Don't worry. I'm like, good. I don't want to do it. My back hurt. I wasn't sleeping well. You know, obviously all this stuff going on. I was miserable and not doing anything because my style had always been you just fight, just keep gritting your teeth and get through it. And you know what? There's a lot of stuff I did, but man, was life miserable. And was I miserable to be around because of that?
Yeah. Grit can only get you so far.
Yeah. And it
Right.
does not, like, you don't build a great life that way. If you're
No.
gritting through something tough that's fantastic and the other side is great for you, it's not really about grit. It's because you had a bigger purpose driving you through. Don't give grit more credit. You
Yeah.
know, that's
Absolutely.
just a bit of endurance. That's not really what's defining your life. And so in these thoughts, these feelings, I found the points to latch onto. And for me, it was like that phrase, dig deep. It's about identifying what it is you're actually digging for, which
Hmm.
is not just a little bit more energy or like, just deal with the pain. It's almost done. That's not a motivation or like a girl thinking I'm attractive. It doesn't work. That's why, like, once no one knew me in the old context, no one really cared. So it stopped being about how I like the fear that I was going to look a different way or people would look at me one way or the other. Like that didn't last. And then I got married. So it's like, well, I don't need any other girls to like me because I got this one and now it's too late. Like she's not going to leave. I got a kid with her. No, like none of those things matter. They're all fleeting. Beach season, your high school reunion, like you want your ex to think you look like that's all fine. And that's why a lot of people lose weight, but none of it ever sticks because
Mm-mm.
that's not motivation. That's just a date on a calendar. So I needed that deeper point to pull on because when you're working out and it's tough and you want to stop, when you're deciding between one thing to eat or the other, and you know which one you should choose, and you know how you're going to feel on the backside after, even though it might be more enjoyable in the moment, it's about how you feel longer term. Or putting in that hard work to find a new job when the job you have is fine and it pays the bills, but you hate it. Like, these are all tough things. For me, one of the biggest was going to talk to someone about my own anxiety issues. I
Yes.
had every excuse in the book. And that was probably the biggest thing that I did. And I don't think any of the other things would have persisted if I didn't start that self-work process. And we can make excuses. Well, I read a lot of self-help books, or, I'm very introspective. I had someone I was coaching who gave me that. She's like, I'm very introspective. I've really already done this work. And I'm thinking, like, then why'd you sign up for this? Because clearly some part of you is like, I need to do more work. That stuff's all great. And it's very valuable to talk to someone else about it.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. We all have a lens through which we see the world. There is no one real truth. It's
yeah,
my truth, it's your truth. And no matter how self-aware we are, there are some things that we try really hard to keep from ourselves. And so having someone else with another lens, and really not someone that's not in your family, someone who doesn't love you,
yeah.
someone who is completely objective and learning about you through your voice for the first time, can see things and hear things and bring things to light that we just can't do on our own.
Yeah. And they have a
Um,
right to challenge you in a way that a loved one really can't.
yes.
It needs to be someone. It's funny, like writing books, that's what my editor is. I've always had like friends or peers or whatever take a look, and they all come back like, this is great. I love it. That's really nice. But that's not going to make my book better. And my
Yeah.
editor, I've worked with the same guy on all my books, and he gets my intention, that's the most important thing. But
Uh-huh.
he's like, have you really pushed yourself here? There's something you're not bringing out in this piece. Or I get what you mean, but you're making connections in your head that you're not making on paper. And because I'm an outsider, I can catch that gap, even though I know your intention. Whereas if I knew the story, if I worked alongside you in that, I'd be making the same connections. I'm going to miss it. So he can call me out for those things. Like I mentioned, that whole medical scientist thing. He's like,
Mhm.
Bryan, I understand. I agree with you on this, but you've taken the reader down a rabbit hole that's pulling them out of your main message. So you
Yeah.
need to pull this out. And that's hard to do because you care about what you're saying. But if you want to move the world forward, you have to let go of this sidebar.
Yeah. Totally get that. So, what is Do a Day? What is the philosophy?
Yeah. So do a day, it starts with a sense of your true motivation. And this is the main difference in the two versions of the book. The newer one starts somewhere else, actually, with self-love. So I talk about your true motivation is like the foundation of your house. That's awesome. But you don't start building a house just by building the foundation. You start by scouting out the ground. And that's self-love. Like, you don't build it on a swamp, right? You don't build it on sand that's going to give way. So self-love is, you have to start from a place of respecting yourself enough to believe that you deserve better and that you're capable of better. And
Yes.
if you're going to fight that notion, the rest of the work is irrelevant because you're always going to hold yourself back. And that's the place I was at.
I feel like we're so in sync with that because I'm a licensed counselor, but I also coach people using the same philosophy. And what drew me to the type of counseling that I do, acceptance commitment therapy, is it has an aspect that cognitive behavioral doesn't. And
Yeah.
it's the focus of self-love,
Yeah.
right? So there are three big components. One is mindfulness, mindful and intentional. One is self-love, and one is being valued centered. So that's exactly what I do with my clients.
Yeah.
But the thing is, and I say that we have 8 domains, and the most important of which is physical and mental well-being. If you don't have the self-love, if you don't have self-value, then it doesn't matter if you are focused on your values.
Yeah.
You won't think you deserve it, and it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. You're
totally
completely
agree.
right. Yeah.
Totally.
Well, and those three pieces that you mentioned, like self-love, we talked about that. The being centered on your values is really what the true motivation is about.
Yeah.
It's understanding your operating laws at your core. What matters to you, what is okay by you, and what isn't. If you're not willing to understand those, your decision basis is going to be off. It's never going to resonate with you, or you won't know when you've made a decision that really isn't the right one. And you won't know why you're deciding what you're deciding. And so it gets very hard to stick to the path when you're on the right path. So that's the true motivation, is like, what matters to you above all else and why? What is that your 10 commandments for you as a human being.
Yes. And if we
Uh,
have that, every time we take an action toward those values, our level of self-love and self-respect goes up.
yes.
When
Yeah.
we don't head in that direction, it goes down.
Yeah. So the thing about all of this, and the third piece is mindfulness, which is what do a day itself means. So spot on to what you're saying. All of these things become self-reinforcing.
Yes.
And I say like one success begets the next because you're building the structure for better. And you move yourself to this next level. And from there, you go to the next one. You don't jump from the base to the top. That's kind of the idea of do a day itself, is a mindful focus on what's going on right here, right now. And where we tend to get tripped up is yesterday and tomorrow. So we
Yes.
have all this, the loss, the pain, the mistakes, and we carry all that forward and we give up our current behavior and opportunity because we're punishing ourselves or we're longing for, or like if my wife did die, what am I supposed to do for my son? Just focus on like, well, your mother's not here, so we can't. Or if she was here with this, well, she isn't. And that's terrible. And it's not to diminish it. But what can we do because we are here? And are we honoring her memory? And it's not to ignore the past. It's not to just be like, okay, that happened. I'm over it. People say, I'm over it, and they're still crying. You're not.
Mm-hmm.
So have your feelings, go through that process. I share all these examples. Like there's one where I screwed up royally at work and I
Oh,
probably
I
should have
love
gotten
that story.
fired. It's a good story. I wish it didn't happen, but it's a good story. But what
Yeah.
you find is like really nobody actually cared. It was bad in the moment. I think I was very responsible about it. I handled it really well in the moment. But what I didn't handle well was it's like I fired myself, even though the company didn't. And so I became very difficult to work with because I was suspicious that everyone was there to take me out, or what was I going to screw up next, or what were they going to say I screwed up because I'm an easy target since I just had this other screw up. I think nobody cared about any of that. They had moved on. And when I had my 6-month review, a couple months later, they didn't even mention the mistake, which they should have. I mentioned it in my write up, but they didn't. So, like, the company actually didn't care. But what they did mention was your behavior over the past couple of months has been quite difficult. Like, people have found you to be combative and no one knows why. I'm like, how do you not know why? That's when it dawned on me, is like, I'm living in yesterday. I'm living as if I'm constantly making that mistake and everyone is constantly mad at me, even though, like, literally the world moved on except for me. And the only mistake that I'm being punished for right now is my behavior from being tied to that past mistake. So we live with that yesterday every single day.
I love it. It's really an intentional boundary to keep you present focused.
Yeah.
And it just increases your ability to focus and be mindful and intentional about what it is that's most important to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it.
And you don't have to give up what you've got going on right now. So we do it with tomorrow too, the fear and anticipation. And I'm sure in your work as an attorney, it was like, what's going to go wrong with this? And it's constant, right? The sky is always about to fall if I'm not there to hold it up.
Yeah.
For me, that was probably my bigger issue. And a lot of it was tied to my childhood and the instability that was there. And because I was the one who stepped in for myself and for others a lot. And here's where we get to justifying it. That's why I was where I was at. That's why I had the success I had. That's why I was financially responsible. That's why people depended on me. And when my
Yeah.
wife got sick, that's why I could step in and keep that family going and care for my son and pay the bills and all those things. So how bad could it be? Isn't it a good thing that I'm constantly freaking out about everything that's going to go wrong so I can save the day? What I realized is you can save the day whether you're freaking out. First of all, you don't have to be a basket case or frantic to make things better. Second of all, you don't actually know what's going to happen. And case in point, loud and clear with my wife. Everyone's saying she's going to die. That doing the math on it, she's not going to survive another month, let alone the summer. And she is still here 9 years later. So even when we're like, the sky was so clearly falling then, no matter what we think, you don't know. And the question you got to ask yourself is when you justify, oh, it's because I freaked out, that's why everything was okay. How do you know that? How do you know that maybe some of your freakouts created other sky falling moments? And if you had handled it differently, things would be smoother.
Yeah.
This is like, we don't know what tomorrow is. And the way we engage with the potentiality of that ends up costing us our achievement in the here and now. That could mean that whole situation doesn't even come to pass for you to have to save the day. but you're not even allowing for that. Again, because of self-love, right?
Yes, absolutely. At the end of the day, self-love is what gets you through.
Yeah.
So I remind myself of that every morning in my morning mindfulness routine. I have certain questions that I ask myself daily. And one of the questions is, how do I want to show up for the people I love in my life today? But another one is, how am I going to show up for myself today? So
Mm,
that at the end of the day, I'm happy with myself. I respect myself, because in the end, when I don't, if I don't, I'm not going to be able to be that person for the people that I love.
yeah.
And so I love that it seems so simple, right? Do a day, but that intentional boundary is something that so many of us overlook.
Yeah.
So I absolutely love that. So what I want to do here is find out some of the things that living the do a day philosophy has done for you,
Yeah.
meaning like it took you from here to here. I want to know some of those.
Yeah. Well, some of the things are literally here to here kind of things. And what I
Yeah.
would say in this is part of that tomorrow is all the work we still have in front of us, which is crushing. And so the weight loss is the most front and center. And that's where like every day to lose 100 pounds is it's done. And there's people who have more than that. There's people who have less. So the actual number doesn't matter. It's always daunting. How many people have 5 pounds they want to lose that just can't get there? It's
Yeah.
hard. And with 100 pounds, you bust your hump. You go hard at the gym every day. You eat nothing. You're like sweating it out, whatever you're doing. And you get on the scale and it says 98 pounds left or 90. I tell you, like, that is as hard as 100 and probably more demoralizing because you're like, I don't have anything left in me. How am I supposed to do this? And that's why we
Wow.
fall off the wagon. And I've seen that with people with drinking or other things that they're abusing substances of some kind, climbing a mountain. So literally, I climbed the 3 tallest peaks in New England where I live. And first of all, I'm afraid of heights. So that's one thing. Even if I'm on the ground, I'm still afraid.
Yeah.
But there were so many moments where it was the middle of summer, but I was getting pelted with sleet. It actually snowed on Mount Washington. This is like mid-July.
Oh, wow.
I got sunburned in a tank top and was like all bundled up in the same climb. It's wild, but like I wanted to quit. I was scared. I was tired, but I kept going because I was like, why am I doing this? Is it my mind? Is it my body? Is it because there's still so much to go and we're not even at the top yet? And then this has been so long coming up. It's going to be really hard going back down. I just want to get in the car and clean up and leave. And I'm hungry. Like all that just starts to pile on. But I say here to there, I've run a marathon. I'm a fat guy who doesn't run. No, I'm not. And I always feel a little twinge when I say this. I'm a runner. And I always say to people, like, you feel like you're not qualified or you jog. Like, guess what? If you've run, you're a runner. Okay, you're not a professional athlete runner. You're not making your career. Most people aren't, but you can still call yourself a runner and you can be okay with that. You don't have to be ashamed or shy or whatever. So I've run, that's 26.2 miles from here to there and all the training before that. It's funny, you drive around your city and you think of the relative distances of things, and then you start running it, and
Oh,
either things
yeah.
seem further or they seem closer. So for me now, having done some of those long runs, I've run from my house in the suburbs into Boston and back and gone through some of the other towns. And I'm like, once I got into those longer distances, I started to realize it's really small. Because to me, like a 2 or 3 hour run became not a big deal. And it was so enjoyable. And I had time with my mind, putting the physical side of it aside to experience the world. So that was a huge growth opportunity for me. And a lot of those runs were like every step I took was a new record for me.
Wow.
And it didn't matter how many more I had to go. And that first run is like 2 miles. And I was coming back from injury and that was hard. And I'm like, how am I supposed to run 26.2? I can't, I'm struggling at two. Well, guess what? You're not running 26.2 today. You're not losing 100 pounds today. You're not getting to the summit in this step. You just need to figure out what can you do in this moment to get yourself to the next moment. And the sum total of those moments is your achievement. And that's kind of a philosophical change and apply it to lots of things. A couple of century rides, 100-mile rides. One of them was supposed to be 100K, which is 62 miles, and they screwed up the course. So at mile 80, I was totally out of water. And I had only been riding for about 6 weeks. I was brand new to cycling, but I was at the front of the pack. So it was like, none of this was possible, right? And I stupidly rode to and from the event from my house, another 10 miles. So I actually had 120 miles to go that day when I had planned to do half of that. But I could, because you know what? I'm not finishing the ride, finding the finish line, getting food and hydration, and getting myself home yet. And maybe my wife can come pick me up. Or like none of that's happening right now I need to get myself to the next check station.
Next thing.
And that's it.
Just the next thing.
Yeah. And then I'll assess then.
Yes. As a recovering perfectionist, one of the biggest changes I've made is not being result focused, but process focused.
Yeah.
That really also helps you feel good about yourself at the end of the day, just living the process. That's awesome. And are you training for an Ironman?
In a roundabout sense, the pool's or the swimming's the tough part for me. I'm cycling and running. I have a lot of injuries in my history. And so I'm being a bit cautious right now. And my wife's alive, but still has issues from Lyme disease and she's immunocompromised. So with COVID going on, everything I do is indoors.
Totally get that.
So for me to do like a long run on the treadmill is not interesting at the moment.
Yeah.
So I'm mixing everything up. So I'm training. I'm in a good place fitness wise when it's the right time for all that. I want to pursue the Ironman. That's one of 2 big goals in my life still.
So what's the other one?
The other one is to go on the show Survivor. I'm working on that one, but we'll see.
Let me know.
That's been like our quarantine binge watching family thing. I used to be a huge fan and then fell off, but now I'm like totally hyped on it again. But we'll see. Cause that was another, like, I could never do that. I'd never make it. I could never do any of the challenges. And now I'm like, yes, I can.
Yeah, heck yeah.
I don't know if I'll win, but like I can absolutely give that a shot.
And I love the fact that you are allowing yourself the flexibility right now instead of saying, I must continue, I must do whatever I can right now to do this, this, and this for the Ironman.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Not losing my fervor about it. I still want to do it, but I'm taking in all the other things that I value.
Yeah.
And letting that drive me and help me be flexible in this situation right now.
Yeah. Before I do the Ironman, I would like to do another marathon because my marathon experience did not go anywhere near according to plan. I ended up getting really sick right before it, and that impacted everything. And so there's a piece of me that wants to right that wrong.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is, like, another way to not hang on to the past is, so it went really poorly. I was about an hour behind where I should have been. Growing up in Boston, you think normal people run sub 3 hours. So like my close friend to run Boston was like 5.5 hours. Like, oh my God, what happened? Did you break your foot? Because I've never heard of people taking that long. So I had my time. I should have been able to hit it. I didn't. The good news is, even if I'm slower than I would have normally been then, it's still going to be a PR because I was so far off from what I should have been able to. So I'd like to have that.
Yeah.
And that can be part of triathlon training.
Yeah. I totally get that. I could talk to you all day long, but I'm wondering if before we wrap it up, I can do a little lightning round.
Yeah.
This or that kind of question.
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. Just a few. Biking or swimming?
Biking.
Tofu or chickpeas since you're vegan?
Oh, that's really hard. I'll go with tofu because I would tend to use that, but chickpeas are a better answer.
Beach or mountains?
Now, probably beach. When I was younger, it'd be mountains.
Okay. Superman or Batman?
Oh, I love toys, but probably Superman because who doesn't want to fly?
Yeah, absolutely. Summer or winter?
Again, now summer. When I was a kid, it'd be winter.
Sunrise or sunset?
Sunrise.
And if you had to go a week without doing one, what would it be? Washing your hair or brushing your teeth?
Well, I'm balding, so brushing my teeth because I don't want to be balding and without my teeth.
That's a much easier question for men, I think.
I think so.
Well, I've had so much fun talking with you today. Tell everybody where they can find more about you and your books.
Yeah, so you can get to everything that I do at bryanfalchuk.com. It's Bryan, like Bryan Adams, and falchuk.com. And I'm at Bryan Falchuk on all social media. So you can always find me there. And I'd love to hear from people. I love people are taking in the message and it speaks to you, or you disagree. Give me a shout.
Absolutely. And so I like to wrap up each interview with the same question. What is one imperfect action that you suggest we all take today that can take us just a little bit closer to our best lives?
An imperfect action. I think this is societally imperfect, but it's really not. So I hope this isn't a cheaty kind of answer, but you can say something nice about yourself or allow someone else to and not feel the need to put it down. So Catherine, when you introduced me, you're saying, you know, how much you appreciated my book. And it's really hard to sit there while someone's complimenting you and I'd be like, oh, it wasn't a big deal or whatever. Like, just be like, wow, thank you. It's good for you and it's good for the person saying it. Don't invalidate their feelings or your own. So just allow for something nice about you, including even if you're just sitting around. Don't call yourself lazy and say you amounted to nothing. Say, I needed some rest today and I listened to that.
Yes, that is not a cheating answer at all.
All right, good.
Because both of those things are perfectionistic driven.
Mm-hmm.
Wanting to slough off a compliment as, well, if I can do it, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
That's being a perfectionist. That's saying the bar is so high, it doesn't matter what I did, it wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is being intentional when it's time to rest and relax. Perfectionists have difficulty with that. They're not enough. They always have to be doing more. So I love your answer. It brings you a little closer to self-love and a little farther away from being a perfectionist.
Yeah.
So with that, I will say thank you so much for being on the show today, Bryan.
Thank you for having me on. It was great.
And thank you all for listening today. And I would just second what Bryan said and go out, show yourself a little self-love and everyone else a little understanding by just taking in the goodness that they want to give you today. And I will see you right back here next week. If you are enjoying this podcast, would you take a moment to go to iTunes and subscribe? It is so easy to do, and it would mean a lot. Imperfect Thriving is a part of the Practice of the Practice podcast network, a network of podcasts seeking to help you thrive imperfectly. To hear other podcasts like the Bomb Mom podcast, Beta Male Revolution, or Empowered and Unapologetic, go to practiceofthepractice.com/network. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information with regard to the subject matter covered. This is given with the understanding that neither the host, Practice of the Practice, or guests are providing legal, mental health, or other professional information. If you need a professional, I encourage you to reach out to one.